Cowboy lived alone for years until a widow with 4 kids was sold to him by accident. Before we ride into this story, take a moment to drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from, what town or city you're calling home tonight. And when the end of this story comes, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now lean back, get comfortable, and enjoy the story. She wasn't for sale. Neither were the children clinging to her skirt like roots in a flood. But when the auctioneer's gavel came down on Lot 74, Arthur Morgan didn't just buy a piece of land. He inherited a mistake dressed in cotton and silence, a widow with 4 mouths to feed and one look in her eyes that said, "We've been abandoned before. Don't make us beg again." He could have walked away. But that night, in a cabin meant for one, a baby reached out through the dark and touched the face of a man who hadn't been called Pa in 15 years. And just like that, solitude wasn't enough anymore. The land came with names. The gavel hit wood like it was splitting bone. Sold Lot 74 Hayes, homestead, and all attached properties. Arthur Morgan didn't blink. Not at first. He'd come to the Silverton auction to buy grazing land, maybe a quiet patch near the creek. Something simple for an aging cowboy with failing eyes and no taste for noise. But when the deed passed into his hands, he squinted at the fine print. Not Lot 47, Lot 74. And that's when he saw her. She wasn't crying, wasn't pleading. She was standing dead center in the dust, 4 children at her side, like a formation. Her spine straight, her jaw tight. Her eyes said, "This ain't the first time we've been stolen." Machen Hayes, 38, widow of a miner buried without a coffin, mother to Ellie, Clementine, Atreus, and baby Judith. The town called her a debt tag, a human extension of property lines. But Arthur saw the truth in that moment. This wasn't a mistake in ink. It was a reckoning made flesh. The sheriff asked if he was sure about the purchase. Dutch Vanderlyn smirked from the back row. "Coat too fine for a mining town. You just bought yourself a whole family." "Morgan," he said, with a voice slick as oil. Arthur said nothing, but when Machen whispered, "There's been some mistake," Arthur looked down at the deed, then at her. No mistake. "Ma'am," the auctioneer said, "the land includes all debts, and those debts include her. 15 years of solitude cracked like thin ice beneath spring thaw. Children, ghosts. He thought he'd buried. Responsibility, a word that tasted like blood in his mouth. But when Judith, just 2 years old, peered up from behind her mother's dress and blinked at him like he might be something safe, Arthur paid. Paid with the money he'd saved for a quiet life. Paid with the quiet itself. The crowd parted as he walked toward the woman and the children. They didn't move, didn't ask for help. They just followed slow, barefoot, burdened as if they'd known all along that the ranch they were being sent to wasn't a place. It was a man. Part 1. The cabin wasn't ready for names. The road to Arthur's ranch wasn't long, but it felt like a sentence. 3 miles of dust and silence, and 6 sets of footsteps trailing behind one man's mistake. Roach, Arthur's old gelding, didn't flinch at the new smells. Children, fear, and something sour clinging to their clothes, like hunger that had learned to walk with them. Machen said very little. She held the baby the way you hold hope, too long, too tight, and afraid to let it breathe. The others moved in a practiced order. Ellie watched the rear, eyes sharp as thorns. Clementine stayed ahead, reading the wind. Atreus clung to his mother's skirt, but kept sneaking glances at Arthur, like a boy trying to decide if a stranger was danger or something softer. They reached the cabin just before dark. It wasn't built for more than one cot, one plate, a single fork, and a chipped cup. The kind of place a man retreats to when he doesn't want visitors. Not even memories. The children stepped inside, and the walls seemed to pull inward, as if the cabin itself was startled. Judith cried first. Her wails bounced off the logs like accusations. Mei-chan hushed her with a soft sway. Clementine looked around. Where do we sleep? Arthur didn't answer. Because truth was, he didn't know. He unrolled his bedroll on the floor, near the door. No curtains, nothing soft, no trace of comfort. You take the bed, he muttered. All of you. Machen hesitated. All of us. Arthur gave a single nod, then stepped outside. The cold bit through his coat, but it was easier than the weight inside, easier than the baby's eyes watching him, easier than the memory of a tiny hand he once held, now buried on a hill that never bloomed. That night, they rearranged his quiet life without a word. Boots beside the hearth, 2 cloth bags tucked under the saddle rack. A family. Not by choice, but by circumstance. Morning arrived with frost and the sound of children breathing under a quilt that didn't quite cover them all. Arthur rationed out his beans, 1 spoonful each. Loneliness didn't divide well. What once fed one, now fed 6 thinly. Clementine watched the spoon carefully, her eyes doing the math, not of food, but of trust. Later, Arthur stepped out to check the horses. Clementine followed, silent. He pretended not to see her slip a piece of jerky into her dress, not because he approved, but because he understood. Inside, Ellie polished the lone mirror, like it might show her something better. Atreus found the empty shotgun shells in the corner and lined them up with quiet purpose. Judith banged her spoon against the floor until the rhythm soothed her into sleep. Arthur walked into the stall, hand brushing Roach's flank, then paused, favoring the back left. Machan's voice came soft behind him. She'd followed like smoke. He looked, missed it. Looked again. She was right. How'd you know? He asked. Had a mare once, she murmured. Same limp. Arthur held the halter, watched as she knelt, pulled a stone from Roach's hoof. With hands that remembered, Roach exhaled. So did Arthur. Thank you, he whispered, for not running. Machan didn't look up. We've run enough. That night, she swept the floor. The children folded their clothes. Judith curled beside the fire like she belonged there. Arthur sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, not because he expected trouble, but because he feared what had already arrived. Not a family, a wound, bleeding into every corner of the life he had spent years stitching shut. And yet, when Judith's tiny hand found his in the dark, wrapping around his fingers like it had every right, Arthur didn't pull away. Part 2. The Math of Hunger and Men. Frost came earlier that year, coated the cabin windows like breath from ghosts. Even the chickens stopped clucking. Too cold, too thin, too tired. Arthur tried to stretch the rations. 1 can of beans became stew. Half a loaf became crumbs. Still, Clementine's eyes followed the pot like a clock. Judith whimpered before sleep. It wasn't just hunger they were fighting. It was pressure, slow, tightening, deliberate. 3 more cows went missing, fence wire clipped, prints too clean to be random, and the general store stopped offering credit. Even the feed supplier delayed deliveries. Politeness turned to excuses. Excuses turned to silence. Dutch's shadow grew long across town. He didn't need to knock his money, did the talking, and then came the offer. He rode in at dusk, gold buttons catching firelight, smile, slicker than fresh oil. Arthur met him at the gate. $5. 0 for the land, Dutch said. I'll see that the family is moved. Safely. He didn't say where. Didn't say how. Just safely. The kind of word that's only true for the man saying it. Arthur said nothing. His jaw clenched. The envelope stayed in his hand a long time. And that night, he almost took it, until Judith, half asleep, reached for him again, Her tiny fingers curled into the beard he hadn't trimmed in months. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just touched him like she knew. He was the only thing between her and another kind of night. He didn't sleep after that. The next morning, Sheriff Grimes came calling. "Hut low." Hand too close to his holster. "Town's getting restless," he said. "Some folks think this arrangement ain't proper." Arthur didn't answer. "You got 48 hours to resolve it. Or we will. 2 days. To erase the only good thing that had ever walked through his door, inside." Ellie packed a satchel like she expected to leave. Atreus stood by the fireplace, holding Arthur's old rifle. "Where do you aim when you're scared?" he asked. Arthur didn't answer that either. That night, they barricaded the windows, moved the furniture inward, stacked what little food they had in the center of the room. No one cried. Even Judith seemed to know. Machen stayed up reading by lamplight. Arthur sat across from her, sharpening a blade he hadn't touched since the war. Their hands did the work, but their eyes kept finding each other. "You're not obligated to us," she said. "I'm not leaving you." She didn't smile, just looked down, like she'd heard those words before and watched them blow away in the first hard wind. Arthur hesitated. "I had a boy once, Isaac, 8 years old. Bright, fast. The fever took him in a week. Mary followed soon after." Michan's fingers stopped moving. The silence held them both. "That's why you built all this alone?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Trying hurts too much." Machan's voice was barely above a whisper. "But not trying hurts more." Later, Clementine practiced sounding the alarm bell they'd rigged from an old tin pot. Ellie marked a ridge to track incoming riders. Atreus watched the front path like a soldier in training. Even Judith stopped fussing. They were becoming something Arthur hadn't planned on, a family that understood siege. By noon the next day, the first riders appeared. 3 men, faces like carved wood, eyes cold as creek stones. They didn't dismount, just checking on the new tenants. The leader said. Arthur stepped forward, rifle not raised, not relaxed either. "You're standing on my land. That's so funny. Folks say it's not yours much longer." Ellie appeared in the cabin window behind him, a shadow, a watcher. One child among 5, and already learning how to hold the line. The men rode off, spitting tobacco into the dust. But their message was clear. You ain't alone. But we're watching. That evening, Machen spread out legal papers across Arthur's table. Land deeds, debt contracts, mortgage notices. She traced a line with her finger and said, "Dutch doesn't own what he claims. If we find the original mining contracts, we can prove fraud." Arthur looked at her like she was made of fire. "You can read all this." Machen nodded. "My husband taught me before the mine took him." Outside, the children laughed around the small fire Ellie had managed to build. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Inside, Arthur made his decision. They wouldn't run. They'd fight, but it wasn't bullets that would save them. It was truth, finally spoken. Portia 3, 48 hours. The cabin didn't sleep that night. It just held its breath. Arthur sat on the porch, cleaning his rifle by lantern light. His hands moved from memory oil, cloth, click, but his thoughts were fogged over, like frost, blurring the edge of a window pane. Machen joined him without a word. She sat close, not touching, eyes fixed on the stars, like they might spell out the next chapter. "I won't let them take you," Arthur said, his voice rough as bark in winter. She didn't flinch. "This isn't your fight. It is now." Their hands found each other in the dark. No kiss, no promise, just skin to skin, real, human, steady. And behind them, the cabin seemed to exhale. Not a house anymore, but the shape of a family, not built by blood, but by something quieter, choice. Morning came on slow wheels. With it more riders, 6 this time. At the lead was Negan Smith, Slickhut, dead eyes, silver spurs that caught the sun like snake fangs. He dismounted slow, deliberate. "Morgan," he drawled, like they were old friends. "You've made things complicated." Arthur stepped between him and the cabin. "I'm not sending them away." Negan smiled, but not with his mouth. His hand did the talking, hovering near his pistol like it had ears. "You've got until sundown tomorrow," he said. "Then we bring the proper order back." Proper order. The words hissed like a noose tightening. That afternoon, Machan laid out old mining records on the kitchen table. Dusty pages, faded ink, but the truth pulsed beneath them. "They never owned it," she whispered. "Dutch's company filed debt contracts before they ever claimed mineral rights. Everything since has been a lie." Arthur stared at the papers. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from hope. "We need a judge," he said. "A real one." "I already wrote to Abigail Marston," she replied. "Territorial court." Arthur looked at her like she was something he hadn't known the world still held. "You've been preparing." She nodded. "My husband died for a lie. I won't let my children grow under one." That night, Arthur taught the children how to survive a siege. Ellie took watch on the ridge. Clementine learned to sound the bell. Atreus practiced loading a rifle, and Judith fell asleep on Arthur's chest. Tiny fingers curled in his coat like roots. "You're good with them," Machan said softly beside him. "They're good kids," Arthur answered. "They need a father." "I'm not that." She didn't argue. She just said, "You're doing fine so far." By morning, the town had gone too quiet. Even the birds seemed to know something was coming. Arthur counted cattle. 10 gone. Fence cut. The math of sabotage was no longer a theory. He rode the perimeter with Atreus. The boy's eyes were sharp. 3 riders. One wore square-toed boots. Atreus said, "You're sure?" Watched his tracks. Arthur almost smiled. Good eyes. Son. He didn't mean to say son, but once it left his mouth, Atreus straightened, like something heavy had been lifted off his small shoulders. Later, Arthur sat alone on the porch, hands heavy, breath slow. He thought about Dutch's offer. $5,000, the kind of money that could buy silence. Clementine stepped outside. She held Dutch's envelope. Without a word, she tossed it into the fire. "It smells bad," she said. Arthur chuckled softly, then watched it blacken, curl like snakeskin, and disappear just before dusk. A voice rang across the ridge. "This is the territorial court. I'm here on federal authority." Judge Abigail Marston had arrived. Negan's men froze. Dutch stepped forward, too polished for this dirt. "This is a local matter," he snapped. "Not anymore," the judge said calmly. "I have evidence of fraud and criminal conspiracy." She dismounted with a stack of documents in hand. Machan stepped forward, hands trembling, but steady. She handed over the contracts. Truth spilled across the table like a map. Dutch went pale. Negan stepped back. That night, the cabin didn't hold its breath. It simply lived. Arthur leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Inside, the children laughed quietly, cautiously, as they helped Machan clear the table. Judith tugged on Arthur's pant leg. "Pup," she said, sleep heavy in her voice. He knelt down. "Yes, sweetheart. Are we safe now?" Arthur looked at her. This child, not born of his name, but wrapped around his soul like a second heartbeat. "Yes," he said. "We're safe now." Part 4. The family that stayed. Spring didn't come with flowers. It came with mud. Cold mornings still bit at the cattle trough. Frost lingered on fence posts. But beneath Arthur's boots, the ground had begun to soften. The slow, reluctant thaw of a land learning how to hope again. And out on the porch at dawn, Arthur noticed something strange. Peace, not the kind he'd grown used to. The hollow, echoing quiet of years spent alone, but the noisy kind. The clatter of a spoon in a tin pot. Clementine, humming off-key, Judith babbling to no one at all. Inside, life had begun to arrange itself. The table, once empty, was now cluttered with chores, books, and half-clean dishes. The fire didn't burn out of desperation anymore. It burned because warmth had finally come home, and at the center of it all was Machan. Not loud, not commanding, just steady. She showed Clementine how to write her name on the back of flour sacks, read out loud from Arthur's old law books, stitch new curtains from old shirts. One morning, Judith sneezed sharp and sudden. Machan looked up from stirring porridge and said, "It's too damp in here. We need a window that opens." Arthur built one the next day. The ranch grew, too. A lean-to went up behind the cabin, just wide enough for privacy. Ellie painted the door pale blue. "Looks like a house now," she said. Arthur nodded. She didn't ask permission. She didn't have to. This place was hers now, too. Atreus took to ranch work like it had always been waiting for him. He rode roach with natural ease, learned to mend fence wire, to track a trail in soft earth, to listen when animals spoke without sound. One morning, he came back with a bundle of wildflowers tied to the saddle horn. "For Ma," he said. But Arthur saw the pride behind the gesture, not the kind born of duty, but of belonging. Clementine became the record keeper. She listed feed amounts, tracked supply chains, rationed what needed rationing. At the feed store, the clerk leaned across the counter. "Your daughter's sharp," he said. Arthur almost corrected him. Almost, but didn't. Not anymore. And then there was the porch. Evenings always led back there. Boots came off. Stories unfolded. Judith's muddy handprint smudged one beam like a declaration. I was here. One dusk, Arthur sat sharpening a blade while Ellie braided Judith's hair. Machan stepped out holding a letter-stiff paper, sealed. "From the governor," she said. "You're invited. All of us. They want to honor what we did for exposing the fraud, for standing our ground." Arthur took the envelope. Stamped, official, proof that the world had noticed, and not because of a gun, because of the truth. "You want to go?" he asked quietly. Machan took a breath. The children should see a world where people listen, where justice means something. Arthur nodded and slipped the letter into his coat pocket. "We'll go." That night, from her cot, Judith called out, "Pa." Arthur stood in the doorway. "Yes, baby." She looked up at him with eyes full of something he didn't feel like he'd earned. "Tell about the horses again." He stepped inside, sat beside her. "Well, horses don't trust easy, but once they do, they'll walk through fire for you. They can smell a storm coming, and sometimes they pick their rider before you even reach for the reins." Judith smiled. "Like Roach picked you," Arthur chuckled. "No, honey, I picked Roach, but you and your siblings." He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You picked me." Outside, the sky opened up. Rain fell soft and steady, the kind that heals more than it soaks. The roof held, the walls held, they held, and Arthur stood beneath it all. Not as a man buried by grief, but as a father, a partner, a protector made new by every burden he once thought would break him. Part 5. The Porch. Knew their names. The Morgan Ranch was never drawn on any map, just a patch of stubborn earth at the end of a dirt road, one lean-to, 3 chickens, a milk cow named Marybelle, and too many boots by the door. But inside that cabin, inside that patched, lived-in space, was everything Arthur Morgan thought he'd buried 15 years ago. The day the papers arrived, Arthur didn't say a word. He just stood on the porch, envelope in hand, the seal pressed like wax over a life he never meant to live, but could no longer imagine without. Morgan family adoption decree, signed by Judge Abigail Marston herself. Legal now. Permanent now. What began as an accident at auction was now carved in ink. Machen stepped out, hands wiped dry on her apron. "They'll have your name," she said. Arthur looked at her. They already had it. Clementine planted marigolds along the fence line. She'd read they kept wandering spirits at peace. Judith called them sunflowers and picked them anyway. Arthur never stopped her. Atreus began keeping a journal, a small leather-bound book he never let out of reach. When Arthur asked what he was writing, the boy looked up and said, "Just remembering things, in case someone ever says we didn't happen." Arthur couldn't speak after that. He just placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and held it there. Ellie got into a teacher's college up north. A scholarship came after the governor heard her speak in the Capitol Rotunda. She wore a borrowed dress, stood behind a podium, and said, "My father didn't ask for us, but he never let go of us. And that's how you know a man's worth." Arthur wept that night. He thought he did it quietly. He didn't. That winter, Arthur rebuilt the barn, not because it needed it, but because he wanted something to stand after he was gone. He carved 4 words into the central beam. Not his name, not theirs, just this: kept, not claimed. We stayed. One evening, as the sun folded itself behind the ridge, Arthur sat on the porch with Machen by his side. The air smelled of horses and fresh bread. Ellie read aloud from a letter. Clementine braided her own hair. Atreus was showing Judith how to whistle through a blade of grass. Machen leaned into Arthur's shoulder. "You ever think what life might have looked like if that auction had gone the way it was supposed to?" Arthur smiled, slow and soft. "I try not to." Later that night, the ritual came again. Judith's voice, small in the dark. "Pa, are we safe now?" Arthur didn't hesitate. "We're more than safe. Baby girl, we're together." He stood in the doorway, long after they'd all gone to sleep, listened to the old wood creaking, to the quiet breath of children, to the deep, earned sigh of a woman finally resting. He couldn't remember the sound of his old life anymore, only this. The legacy he left behind wasn't written in law books or ledgers. It was carved into porch rails, etched into laughter, pressed into muddy handprints on the kitchen wall. And it was enough. The story that stayed. Years from now, no one will remember the gavel that struck wood that morning in Silverton. No one will recall who bid what, or how many acres changed hands. But some stories don't ask to be remembered. They just stay, like laughter echoing off old porch rails, like muddy handprints that refuse to fade from the kitchen wall, like a woman's voice reading by lamplight when the wind begins to howl. Arthur Morgan never set out to be a father again. He never planned to take in a widow, or teach a boy to ride, or build an extra room onto a cabin meant for one. He only meant to buy grassland, but fate doesn't care what a man meant to do. It just hands him a mistake and waits to see what he does with it. They say the Morgan Ranch still stands, just beyond the ridge, where the sun sinks slow, and carved into the porch beam, faint now, weathered by wind and rain, are 4 quiet words: kept, not claimed. We stayed, not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because love, when chosen freely, outlasts the wolves, the winters, and the names carved on deeds. Now tell us, what did this story stir in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and rate it from 0 to 10. And if stories like this bring you comfort, go ahead and subscribe, ring that bell, and ride with us again next time. If this tale settled somewhere deep in you, the next one goes even deeper. And if you've ever chosen family over freedom, or silence over revenge, type it in the comments now. I understand, Arthur. Until next time, ride steady. And remember, sometimes the family we didn't plan for becomes the legacy we never dreamed we'd leave behind.